Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and I'm going to start off with an apology that my studio is very echoey today. So as you may know, if you've been listening for some time, my husband and I are moving. We are moving to Europe on Wednesday. Oh my goodness. And our house is about 95% empty at the moment, except for my studio until I finish this episode and then break it down. So all the soundproofing has been taken down out of my studio and in preparation for breaking down the rest of it. So if it's very echoey, I do apologize, but you just got to do what you got to do sometimes. And I wanted to get this episode up because, well, I mean, I love all of my author interviews. This one is a returning guest, as I mentioned at the end of the last episode. Christine Isley-Farmer is returning to talk about the second book in her Boomer's Tales series. It is a children's book featuring a dog named Boomer, who is the narrator of the stories. They're told from Boomer's perspective, and Boomer's humans, Chloe, and her Nana Weathers. So Christine is returning, and as with the last time Christine was on the podcast, my niece, who is now 11, Risa, joined us to talk about the book. So she was able to read the book and then joined us to talk about it. And this time, instead of being in Montana with her when the interview took place, she got to join herself from Montana. I'm in California at the moment, and so she got to, get the Zoom link and log in and do all of that. And she was pretty excited to not only do another podcast, but get to read the book and everything. So a lot of fun. I really enjoy that. Christine asked if Risa could be a part of the interview again. Christine is very sweet to include Risa, and Risa was etc., will continue to be very excited to not only read the book because she loves dogs. She actually said to me today, "Auntie, I listened to the last podcast that we did with Christine, and I just want to say thank you for saying I was a dog in a former life." So you're welcome, Risa. I am still convinced that you may have been a dog in a former life because you just love them so much and you have an affinity for them. So that is what is going on. Let me go ahead and give you the description of the new book. It is called A Hard Nut to Crack. Again, it is the second in this series, and the description is as follows. An upset Robbie shows up on the doorstep of the home of his friends, Chloe, Boomer, and Nana Weathers. His dog, Hoppy, disappeared from his backyard. When Hoppy hasn't returned by the next day, family and friends spring into action. Boomer makes friends with two squirrels in a squirrel network who offer to help with the search. Will the piling up clues lead to a reunion for Hoppy and Robbie? So book number 2 is a mystery. Book number 1 was not a mystery, so this one is a mystery. We have to solve the mystery of what happened to Hoppy. Why did he disappear? If he ran away, why can't they find him? Is he going to come home, etc.? We get some new characters in the squirrel network, and Christine's going to talk about that network and why there are squirrels in this book in addition to the dog characters. So let's go ahead and turn now to the interview with Christine so you can hear more about book 2 and Chloe and Boomer and Robbie and Hoppy. So here's the interview with Christine Isley-Farmer. Hi, Christine. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
I am so glad to have you back. And we're going to talk about the second book in your series about the dog named Boomer. But before we get to that, for anybody who didn't hear the first interview or who maybe needs a refresher, if you could share a little bit about yourself, that would be great.
Yes, I'm glad to do that. I am a retired university music professor. And prior to being a music professor, I was a former professional singer in the classical music genre, and I sang in Europe and here in the United States. A little bit about myself as a writer is I began writing the Boomer series that it originally started as a short story. I had no idea that these were going to become story was going to become a series of books called Boomer's series. But that's what happened. And that harkens back to my childhood when I liked to write. And I wrote short stories when I was in the 5th and 6th grade. So that's sort of an idea of my background and a little bit about why I wrote these books.
So, what happened to turn it from a short story into a whole series?
Well, as I was writing the short story, I was thinking I wanted to write a short story about a dog who can sing. And as I started thinking about it, well, does it make sense just to have you have to have a child in it? And I wanted to have a child. And then I thought, well, what's the relationship to singing and to speaking? And then I thought, what about if the dog can't yip and the little girl has a stutter? They both have a problem with communication. So that's how it started to evolve, first in the first book. And then from there, I just took off and decided that I would write at least 6 books in the series. And to date, 6 books have been written. They're not published yet. Only 2 are published. The third one is coming out in May. But my idea is to have 6 in the series and then perhaps finish with the series by then.
And the second one is called A Hard Nut to Crack, and we're introduced to some new characters in this one. Can you give an overview of the story?
All right. Yes, the overview of the story is that in the first book, where our children are made aware of Chloe and Boomer's relationship. And in dog obedience school, they meet a little boy named Robbie and his dog Hoppy. And the 4 of them become very close friends. In fact, they go through dog obedience school together, and they also practice their training, the things they're learning in dog obedience school in their training time away from dog obedience school. So in A Hard Nut to Crack, it picks up with Robbie having been in his house doing his homework, and Hoppy needs to go out to potty. So he lets him out in their backyard, which is fenced in, and he goes back in to finish what he's doing on his computer. And by the time he's able to return to his backyard, his dog has disappeared. And he and his mom go around the neighborhood trying to figure out how he's gotten out, because the fence door has been left open. So, but they can't find him. So the next day they get together. He shows up on Chloe's doorstep because she's his best friend. He shows up on Chloe's doorstep to tell her and Nana Weathers that Hoppy has disappeared. And they decide that if he's not found by the next day or comes home by the next day, they will have a meeting of all the friends and all the family to try to figure out what has happened to Hoppy. So that's the opening of the book and what happens there. But there are some new characters that are introduced into the story, and that's a squirrel network. And the squirrel network is a group of squirrels that, of course, we all know that squirrels leap from tree to tree, and they have families. And in the squirrel network, they become involved in solving the mystery, because there's a group of squirrels that live in the big oak tree that Nana Weathers has in her backyard. So that's how we find these squirrels that are in the mystery. There's a mystery here because no one knows where Poppy is, and they're trying to find him. So Boomer enlists the aid of the Squirrel Network. And I had to read up about squirrels when I started thinking about having squirrels in a book, because a lot of us don't know much about their habitats and how they live. But I studied that, and I had to include their dialogue in the book too. So I would always preface their dialogue with sentences like acorns aplenty, because we know that they eat nuts. Also ripe mulberries, they eat fruit and berries, or things like cracked nuts and seeds. So in studying their habitats and their behavior, I thought that would be a cute addition to this book. And, squirrels always know everything there is to know in the animal world, because they do network and they do send out signals. The other part of this was creating a language other than English for how they communicate with one another that may not be always understood. So I had to come up with a word for that. It was called sick, T-S-I-K. So squirrels are known for their ticking. We often call that chattering, but I also invented a word for that.
We're going to go ahead and take our first break of the podcast, but I love that Christine invented a word, because I love making up words and finding out words that other people have made up in various contexts. So that's awesome. We are going to talk more about the series and the books when we return, so stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
GSMC Beauty Tips Podcast gives you advice on everything from hair to fashion to skincare products. We'll talk about the latest trends in makeup, hairstyles, and anti-aging remedies. And we'll cover all of the newest fashion trends. If you have an interest in or questions about the beauty trends that might work best for you, the Golden State Media Concepts Beauty Tips Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Beauty Tips Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking, along with my niece Risa, to author Christine Isley-Farmer, who has returned to the podcast. Before the break, she was talking about the squirrels and making up a word for their chatter, and so I just wanted to remind you of that, because we're going to pick up that conversation kind of, not exactly in the middle, but between her answer and my question, my next follow-up comment, we took a break. So just a reminder. I like that you invented a word and all of the little phrases that the squirrels say, which we could use in human speech too, instead of some of the phrases that we come up with that aren't quite as nice.
Well, I don't know if I went out and said in the grocery store, acorns aplenty. Where are the nuts today? There are not plenty of nuts today.
I like it. Risa, you have the next question, but I'm going to ask you a question also. Did you have a favorite squirrel saying from the book? Do you remember the squirrel sayings?
I think it was the acorns one.
Acorns aplenty. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like the one, I think it's cracked nuts and seeds. That one just sounded a little more like definitive
of what they do. And especially in the book when, Humphrey is trying to steal a nut. And so, what happens to that. Let's don't give away everything that's in the book, but Nana Weathers comes in to help out that situation.
Yes. Okay, Risa, go ahead with your question.
What was the inspiration for the story?
Oh, the inspiration for the story was my childhood. And my childhood had to do with reading a lot, and especially mysteries. And I may have said this the last time I was on the podcast, but I loved the Nancy Drew series, and I still have my collection of those books that I read. I'm waiting to pass them down to my great niece, who's a little young for them right now, but I hope that she will enjoy them when I have the chance, when she's old enough and she can read them. But that was the inspiration for the story. And I think another inspiration for the story is that I love to walk. And I've done a lot of nature hikes, and I'm very inspired by being outside and fascinated by animals, and the animals that are especially in the woods. And of course, we find a lot of squirrels in the woods. And so that just made sense to bring them into the picture for this story.
Thank you. In terms of characters, obviously, Chloe and Boomer are back, Robbie and Hoppy are back. But how do you think, especially Chloe and Boomer, they're kind of the main characters, how do you think they've evolved or changed, if any, from the first book?
Well, they have changed. Well, Chloe is much more self-confident now. Although she still stutters, the way it's depicted in the book is, if you compare the first book to the second book, there's less stuttering in the second book. And the reason for that is she started working with a speech therapist. And that was mentioned in the first book, that Nana Weathers told her, would you like to work with a speech therapist? And she said, yes. So that is one of the main changes in Chloe's character, is that she's less self-conscious. And I think that also has to do with what happened at the talent show. So she's much more confident in herself. And Boomer is older, and the way that's depicted is his vocabulary has increased. If you notice in the first book, it was intentionally set up that as a puppy, he couldn't identify certain things unless he heard the words that referred to those particular things. Once he heard those, he was able to identify it. For instance, Nana Weathers' ring was a circle. When he first talks about the ring in the book, he sees it, he thinks of it as a circle. So his vocabulary has increased, and it reflects the maturity of a dog. Since dogs don't live as long as human beings in general, his maturity is accelerating faster than a child's.
Since you mentioned the ring, I know Risa is curious about the ring. So Risa, do you want to ask your next question? I'm also curious.
When will we learn the full story of Nana's ring?
Well, you already know a little bit of the backstory. Do you remember any of it? When she tells Boomer about her ring, do you remember anything? Or has it been such a long time since you read the book that you don't really remember?
Don't really remember.
Okay, so let me refresh you. In the first book, Nana Weathers tells Boomer that she inherited the ring from her grandmother. And the ring has it's capable of powerful magic. And it needs to go to only someone who can be trusted, that they will use it in a good way, not for evil purposes. Because, if a ring has magic powers, then the person who wears that ring can do, like Gollum. You remember Gollum in the Lord of the Rings?
I'm not sure she's seen those.
Okay. Like Gollum, who used that ring for evil, but we know that Nana Weathers is not evil, and she does say to Boomer that one day Chloe will inherit that ring. Now, that's the only background she gives about it, and you're not going to be able to know fully what happens until the sixth book, because there's an epilogue already written in the sixth book that reveals more about the ring, who inherits it, and other things that will sort of be a surprise.
So, Risa, I think the answer to our question is, oh man, not yet.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's like, keep reading, Risa.
That's right. Christine, you mentioned a little bit about doing some research on squirrels. What was there any other kind of research that you did for this particular book?
Not for this one. Because it was a mystery, and I'm so familiar with how mysteries are plotted from having read them as a child and reading them as adult. I am an avid mystery reader. So I didn't feel like I needed, for plotting for a child's book, I didn't need to do too much research about the book itself, about plotting a mystery. I think I did fairly well with that. But it was so much fun to write. It really was a lot of fun to write. And all the clues that were left. Mm-hmm. I think that was the fun thing about the book. So it invites children, and Risa, you've had a chance to read it. It invites you to think about who possibly could have taken Robbie. But you get a few clues in the book, don't you?
Yes, and actually, I have a few questions that I would love to ask you about the person who did take Hoppy, but I don't want to give things away, so I'm not going to ask those questions.
Okay, thank you.
But
there's a reason for there's a justification. Yes. Although we know that stealing from someone is never a good thing to do.
Yes. And Risa, did you pick up on the clues? Do you like reading mysteries? Do you like trying to solve mysteries while you're reading?
Well, yes, because stories I've been writing are usually about mysteries. So
that's true. That was a silly question on my part.
It was, but you are silly, so
that's true. I'm okay with that.
Well, Risa, you will enjoy the fourth book because there are two mysteries in that one.
Ooh.
We're doubling the mysteries in the fourth book. Not in the third book, but in the fourth book.
But you have to wait till the fourth book.
Yeah, that's sad. But
which actually kind of leads to Risa's next question. So go ahead with your next question, Risa. I'm actually going to jump in before Risa can ask her next question, and I'm doing this purely because I know it will make her say, "Ugh, rude." So we're going to take our second break of the podcast, and when we come back, we'll have Risa's follow-up question. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my interview with Christine Isley-Farmer alongside my niece, Risa. Let's get back to the interview.
What can you tell us about book 3?
Oh, okay. Well, book 3 segues really from the first book. You remember the talent show? Well, Chloe and Shannon, there's a at the very end of the second book, there's a fundraiser that's being held to raise money for students to attend a music camp. And Chloe and Shannon, her friend who plays flute, are chosen to go to this music camp. They're given a scholarship. So book 3 opens up with them traveling to this camp. Boomer has been invited along as a mascot, and Nana Weathers, who plays the piano, is invited to play for the chorus. And because she likes to cook, she's helping out in the dining hall. So that's how the third book starts out. And the name of it is Camp Resound, and it should be released in May of this year. So I'm looking forward. The illustrator is working on the illustrations, which I have approved, and we collaborate together, and he's filling those in. So I'm looking forward to seeing that in publication in May. But Camp Resound is a music camp, and at that camp, you are going to be reintroduced to a couple of characters that were in the first book. And one is Peanut. Do you remember who Peanut was or is, Risa?
Isn't he the Chihuahua?
Yes. And remember,
yes.
He was the bully? Good
yes.
memory.
My Chihuahuas take offense at that. Thank you very much. although one of them is totally a bully, so it's all good.
Well, the Chihuahua, Peanut, the Chihuahua, who was the bully in that obedience class, the smallest dog in that class was the bully. And his owner, whose name is Jack Hunter, we don't learn his name in the dog obedience class, but his name is Jack Hunter, and he's there to be a camp counselor. And he's also a musician. He plays the violin. So those two characters reappear along with Nana Weathers and Boomer and Chloe and Shannon in the third book. I try to link some of the characters throughout the books in some way, but they all appear in the end in the last book. Anyway, so in this book, they encounter a young boy, or a boy who's there, who's in their age group. The age group for the camp is 9 to 12. And let's put it this way. Have you ever experienced in school, or are you homeschooled or you go to school?
I go to school.
You go to school. All right. Now, you may not have encountered this, but have you ever heard anyone being called names?
Yes.
Okay. So this is what happens to one of the children in the book. And he happens to be of a Hispanic origin. And he is called by his schoolmates, not at the camp, but by his schoolmates. He's called a Beaner and Brownie. Brownie, why? Because his skin is more brown, and Beaner is because Hispanic peoples are associated with beans. So those are derogatory, that's hate speech. And so we're in a situation where this child comes from a school. He doesn't want to be at that camp, but his parents have wanted him to come because he doesn't feel like he fits in. But the other reason he doesn't fit in is because he has a prosthesis. We don't know too much about what happened to him to cause that accident, but we do know that he has a prosthesis from his knee down. And so he has a slight limp. So there's two things for this child. He doesn't feel that he fits in because of his race or his nationality. And he doesn't feel that he fits in because of his prosthesis. And Shannon and Chloe identify with this because Chloe still stutters, and she knows what it's like to be teased for something. And Shannon is African American. So those two team up with Carlos. They make other friends, but they team up with Carlos and they sort of befriend him because they understand what he's going through. And Carlos is a very talented violinist. And I can tell you, for a child at that age to play the violin well is not any easy task, being a musician myself and knowing how difficult it is to learn to play a violin. But anyway, as the story goes on, there are several incidents that happen that make us think that Carlos is suffering from something other than being called names. And he suffers with something called PTSD. Do you know what that is? Have you ever heard of it? Either one of you?
I have, yes.
Okay. So it's post-traumatic syndrome disorder. And that means that something, and I'm not going to expose what's going on in the book, but something causes a person who's been traumatized to react in a way that is either over emotional or is it can be explosive in some way. So Carlos has this problem, and what happens at Camp Resound is he is, through a series of things that happen, he has a couple of repeated episodes, and so it's his friends at the camp, which turn out to be Jack, Chloe, Shannon, Boomer, and then Peanut and Nana Weathers, that help Carlos have let's say, a good ending to the story.
Well, that's good. I'm going to actually pop in here to give Risa a plug, because both Risa and her older sister Maya play violin in orchestra at their school.
That's true.
Wonderful. And the violin's not an easy instrument, is it?
No, it's not.
It's not. I know, because I know people who play the violin, and I don't play the violin, but I know how difficult it is to play. So how old are you, Risa?
I'm 11.
11. Okay. So you're about the same age as Carlos is in my book.
Huh.
So he's a little older than Chloe, because Chloe and Shannon are probably 10 at this point. But so Carlos needs friends, and he needs support, and he gets it at this camp. And because of that, he has a breakthrough.
All right. Thank you. So we know that book 3 is coming out probably in May. You've written or you at least know where the story is going for all 6 books. So are you working on anything particular right now in terms of writing?
Okay, well, I am working on the 4th book, because as soon as you get the illustrations ready for the 3rd book, you send out to your editor your 4th book, because it takes a while for all of this procedure. There are a series of things that have to happen when you're writing a book and you have an editor and this, that, and the other. So, yes, I'm working on the 4th book. As you'll notice Chloe will, Risa will notice that in Hard Nut to Crack, the first chapter of Camp Resound is in the back of the book. So that one is like letting people know that there's another book that's coming, and to stay tuned for its publication, but they get an idea of what the book may be about. So yes, I'm working on the 4th book, and that's the one that has a double mystery, and it's going to be called Long Lost Elvis. Not Elvis Presley.
Bummer. No.
And as I say, it has dual mysteries, but the mysteries are related. The first mystery has to do with the disappearance of a painting. We get the visual arts in here a little bit. And the second one has to do in the end of the second book, Hard Nut to Crack, Nana Weathers and Chloe are at this music festival, a fundraiser for this festival. And there's a donkey there who's being ridden by the children. Do you remember that, Risa?
Yeah, isn't that Elvis?
That's Elvis.
Dang, Risa,
So
good
Elvis,
job.
very good memory. So Elvis shows up in the 4th book, and there's a mystery about Elvis. So we got 2 mysteries that come up in the fourth book.
And as we go into our final break of the podcast, I will say that I like that each of these books is not the same. The first one dealt with Chloe and Boomer finding confidence and working through their issues. Boomer finding his yip, and Chloe working on her stutter and gaining confidence with singing. And then this one, the second one, is a mystery. The third one takes place at the music camp, but the fourth one is a double mystery. I just like that it's not the same format every time. I think that's really cool, and definitely will pique the interest of readers who like different types of books or different genres of books. So I think that's a great idea. We're going to take that final break of the podcast. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion of Risa's and my interview with Christine Isley-Farmer. And just as a reminder before the break, Christine was talking about the dual mystery that is involved, that takes place in book 4, and she mentioned something about a missing painting, and that will put Risa's next comment into context for you.
Okay. First, when you said painting, I thought you said missing penguin. So that confused me.
I said what? Pinky?
Painting.
Oh, painting. All right. Sorry. Painting.
Risa's brain is always geared toward animals, though, so she'll always take the...
Okay.
That's true. Okay. What have you been reading?
Oh, my goodness. A lot. I'm in a book club. So that meets on a monthly basis. So I finished reading the book for our book club, which doesn't meet until March 20th. But this is not something that you would read because it's adult reading. It's by Jojo Moyes. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, the last name, The Giver of Stars. Have you heard of that one, Sarah?
I've heard of the author. I have not read her, and I that title only sounds vaguely familiar. Is it one of her newer ones?
I don't know exactly when she wrote this one. I don't think it's exactly one of her newest ones, but the story is very interesting. It's fiction, but it's based on Eleanor Roosevelt's initiative to promote literacy, especially in rural areas. So it takes place in Baileyville, Kentucky, and where a team of women join together as a traveling library, and they travel on mules and horses. It's sort of like the pack horse. It's called the Women's Pack Horse Association, and they deliver books and magazines and comic books into areas of Kentucky that, in this specific area, is in a mining area. So they live in the hills because mining is done in the hills and the mountains. So it's very interesting. I really enjoyed that book. It's well written, and the story is very. It makes you want to continue reading as you as you read any book, you want to turn the page and find out what's going to happen next. The characters are interesting.
That helps.
So that I also just finished. I said I enjoy reading mysteries. I just finished a psychological thriller, which is also a mystery called Rock, Paper, Scissors by a British author named Alice Feeney. And it has lots of twists and turns in it. And I love mysteries where I can't figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
So she writes mysteries that are like that. The first one I read was called Sometimes I Lie. And I'm on Goodreads, and there were a lot of people on Goodreads who did not like that one, but I loved it. I thought it was really interesting because you can't figure, in that one, you couldn't figure out who really was a narrator. And that's always a twist when you find out who that is.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that I would imagine that'd be harder to write also.
Yes, and she has a way of writing so that you're not always sure who is narrating. And that was Sometimes I Lie. I believe that was her first book that she released.
Okay. I'm going to turn the tables. And Risa, I know you like to write mysteries, but do you like to read mysteries also? And what kind of mysteries do you like to read?
Mainly fictional mysteries. But
Okay.
like my favorite author of those are whatever his name is.
Oh yeah, that guy.
That guy.
His series is the A to Z Mysteries.
Okay.
Oh yes. Okay.
Yeah, I like his series.
Good.
I've read one of the Nancy Drew books. It was
Which one have you read?
I think it was the Hit and Run case.
Okay. Well, I was going to also tell Risa about when you asked about what I was reading. I do read children's books, and one that I read that I thought was really cute, and this might interest you too, Risa. It's called Hank. It's called The Original Adventures of Hank the Cow Dog. So we know that the main character is a dog, and it's written by a man named John R. Erickson.
I like that series.
Have you read
that series? Yeah, not all of them, but I have read Hank the Cow Dog. Some of them.
Yes. So the first one, in the first one, Hank has to solve a mystery of a murder that's taken place on the ranch. Did you read the first one?
I think I have a long time ago.
Okay. But what's nice about it, and which the dog's dialogue and all of the characters' dialogue matches being a cowboy dog. In other words, things that cowboys, the way they would speak and the language, the vocabulary they would use. I found that fun. So I've enjoyed that. And I've read a couple of children's books that I got from our library, but I cannot remember what the name of those names were. But this one I bought and thought it was very cute to read.
Well,
and I also read Charlotte's Web. Have you read Charlotte's Web by E.B. Wright?
Yes. Have it in my room somewhere in that messy room of mine.
That's a wonderful book.
Mm-hmm. I think it's somewhere on my bookshelf, right? Yeah, somewhere.
Probably. Well, Risa has not only a dog, but she also, Risa and her family also have cows, but her dog is not a cow dog.
No, not particularly.
No.
Well, in book three, Camper Zound, the campers go to a place called Happy Barn. And Happy Barn is on a farm, and there are goats and cows and chickens and all kinds of farm animals. But Happy Barn is also based on a real life experience I had, which has happened here in Christiana, Tennessee. I visited what they call the Gentle Barn, where they house animals who have recently had surgery or are recovering because and a lot of these animals that they have there are animals that have been mistreated, and they have found a home in a place where they are loved and cared for. And this is you can contribute you can send money to this Gentle Barn. I think there are 3 of them across the United States. But it was one of the reasons that I included this chapter in Camper Zound, because there is at the Gentle Barn where I went, there was a 2-year-old goat named Shaggy, Lola. Shaggy's the goat in the book. Lola, who had been left out in the field by the owner, and both of his hind legs had to be amputated because they were frostbitten and beyond repair. So a local vet there, replaced those legs and gave that baby goat 2 prostheses. And I just thought that was, with Carlos having a prosthesis, that would be a nice relationship for him to see that there's an animal that also has a prosthesis. So I included that in the book, Camp Resound, as well.
Risa, are you noticing that you and Christine, I think, might be soulmates? I mean, okay, so there's the love of animals. There's the fact that you play violin. She brought up violins. Hank the cow dog. You have cows. And then what did I just notice in this last can you guess?
Lola.
Lola.
That's
Yes.
Risa's dog's name.
Oh,
And
okay.
she's currently just laying on the rug.
Okay, it's Lolly. I'm sorry. Did I say Lola? I meant to say Lolly. Maybe you said Lola enough, but Lolly is.
Oh, I
the goat,
misunderstood.
but that's very close. That's close enough.
That's funny. Well, I asked you this last time, but I'll ask again about website and any social media that people can interact with you.
Of course. Well, I have a Facebook page. It's my Christine Isley-Farmer author, which links to that's the author page other than my personal page. So I have 2 different pages on Facebook. And for people who are wanting to relate to me as an author, they can do that on that page, or on Instagram, Isley Notes, ISLEYNOTES. I often post about my books on Instagram as well. I'm on Twitter and on LinkedIn. Those are my social media that I regularly get on in some way. But I also have a website, and if people are interested in getting on the website, that's www.goodreads by Christine, and my name is spelled CHRISTINE.com, and that's the website, and they can go on and probably when you send me this podcast, that will be posted on my website. They can also read about my books, read reviews that I've gotten on of my books. And I would like also to add that my debut book, Finding My Yip, that you read, Risa, was named a finalist in the children's fiction category of the 2021 American Writing Awards.
That's cool.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you. I was very honored and pleased that was the case.
All right.
So,
yeah.
and if you want, I was going to say on my GoodreadsChristine.com, if people are interested in getting on my mailing list, they can also sign up for that. And I send out a newsletter every 2 weeks.
All right. Thank you for that. Well, I always like to ask at the end of the conversation if there's anything that we haven't covered. Before we get to that, though, I'm going to double check with Risa. Risa, did you have any other questions that you wanted to ask Christine?
None that come to mind.
Okay. All right. Well, Christine, is there anything that we haven't talked about in terms of the series or writing or anything that you wanted to mention at this point?
I think that we went over everything. You sent me some of the questions ahead of time, and I don't think I have anything else that I need to tell you, except I hope that people will buy my books.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, they're really fun. And also I love that there's 2 out now, but then more to look forward to. So people should definitely check them out.
Thank you. And, they can be, they're on Amazon and other, you can buy them on Amazon. You can get them through Barnes and Noble. They're listed on Barnes and Noble on Amazon is for ages 7 to 12. But I think that if you have a young reader who you as an adult help with reading and like to read too, that they would still enjoy them.
I agree. Yeah. Well, Christine, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to talk to not only me, but to Risa about your books. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for letting me be on it.
Bye, Risa. Take care. Keep reading and playing the violin
Thank
and
you.
writing.
Thank you once again to both Christine and Risa for joining me, especially since today was a crazy day with movers and delays and different things, and I had to actually reschedule and push it back 2 hours. So they were both incredible. To A, I'm so glad that they were both available 2 hours later than originally scheduled, and B, they were very kind and patient with my moving stuff. So thank you to both of them. And thank you as always to you for taking the time to listen to these episodes. Hopefully you find new books and new authors that you love and maybe can pass along and share with your friends. If you are a fan of this podcast, I hope that you will share it with your friends, of course, along with the book recommendations that you find here, but also follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Also, leave a review. That really helps us to get this this podcast out to more listeners such as yourselves, people who love books as much as we do. I would really appreciate that. I also hope that you will join me for the next episode when I will have another returning author coming back to the podcast. J.P. McLean will be joining me to talk about the first book in another series. We talked about the first book in a different series the last time she was with us, but we're going to talk about the first book in her series, and this book is called Secret Sky. So hopefully you will join me for that episode when I will be posting from Europe. Oh my goodness. I'm going to take some deep breaths and try not to have a panic attack about that. It should be fine. But yeah, looking forward to that, sharing my adventures with you. Hope you're having a great week, and I hope that whatever your week involves, it involves plenty of time to get yourself lost in a good book. Thanks.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.